Hi, welcome back again to Philosophy 201, or History of Ancient Greek Philosophy. You should have read by now Plato's Phaedo, that middle dialogue, which among other themes we encountered Plato's theory of forms, the cornerstone of Plato's epistemology and ontology, his theory about the nature of knowledge and about things that knowledge is directed at, about the objects of our cognition, about the entities that exist in this world. This week you have some reading selections from the Republic among your readings. The Republic was another middle dialogue of Plato's. It's one of Plato's most important and lengthiest works. It's divided into a total of 10 books or 10 scrolls, so you can think of maybe something like 10 of his regular dialogues added all together in one long continuing conversation. Like many of his dialogues, it touches upon many different themes. The central question of the Republic is the question, what is justice? And it doesn't really receive an answer. No surprise there. We're not going to be looking at that in the Republic, however, and I do encourage you at some time to get yourselves a nice copy of the Republic and to give it a thorough reading. You will get a lot out of it. The selections you have to read for this week are a few brief passages out of the central books of the Republic, some from books 5, 6, and the beginning of book 7. They include some of the most famous and most commented upon passages in Plato. And we're going to use these passages to give us a further look into his theory of forms. In the passages from the Republic, we will see that Plato approaches the theory of forms and explicates it for us, like in the Phaedo, relying heavily upon the use of metaphor and analogy. Not argument in what you might think of as a traditional sense of a philosophical argument, although we'll see that he does make use of arguments as well. But to follow the arguments, you have to follow his metaphors and analogies. The analogies that Plato uses here carry over to some extent from the Phaedo as well, namely and especially the analogy of the image and the relationship of an image to the original that it deficiently is a copy of. Now we'll see too, and we see in our first passage from Book 5 of the Republic, that Plato's theory of forms has consequences for his conception of knowledge itself. And it may lead to a very different conception of knowledge than what you are used to thinking of knowledge in terms of. So you might want to take a moment just to think about how you think of knowledge and opinion. Now, we're all aware of a contrast between knowledge and opinion. We think of these as two different things. Okay? Sometimes we think of opinions as things that are not really susceptible of knowledge. Right? Like when we say about something that someone utters, oh, that's just your opinion, or about ourselves, oh, that's just my opinion. Certain things that we hold beliefs about may be things that we think are not susceptible of knowledge or not the sort of things that we could have knowledge of. If, for example, I tell you that I think a banana split tastes better than a bowl of, say, Brussels sprouts, okay? Even if you don't share that opinion, right, you're unlikely to answer, no, you are wrong, and I will prove it to you. This is, so matters of taste are examples of things that we think of are opinions where there is no knowledge. But we don't always think of that as the case. Oftentimes we think that there's a certain relationship between knowledge and opinion, where you might have opinions about something, but we're not really sure, so we think of it as an opinion. About the same subject matter, if we have confidence in our views, maybe we're sure that we know something. Now notice something else about the way we ordinarily probably think of, most of us probably think of the relationship between knowledge and opinion. That is that knowledge it's not just a psychological matter for us, right? Whether or not you have knowledge about something isn't just a psychological question, although it definitely has psychological elements. We think of knowledge in some way as something that is well-founded, it is certain. We have enough evidence for what we say that we know to be sure that we are not wrong. Now, that feeling of being sure that you're not wrong about something, it's quite possible, as we all know, to be mistaken about that. We can feel absolutely certain about something, think that we know something, and then lo and behold, it turns out that we were in fact mistaken. Right? So we're not going to conclude from that we had knowledge, but that our knowledge was false. Right? More likely, we're going to conclude that we thought that we knew it, but we didn't actually know it. Right? If we really know something, right, then we're going to think that we're not really so mistaken about it. So we ordinarily associate with knowledge some kind of evidence. In fact, one of the most common definitions that's given of knowledge, and it's an ancient definition, you can find it in Plato as well, is that knowledge is justified true belief. So justified true belief, notice that has three components to it. The first of those is belief. Okay, so this is a fairly simple one. If you know something, then obviously you believe it. Okay? You're unlikely to think about anything, oh, I know this, but I absolutely don't believe it. It can't be true. Now you might say something like that as a kind of an expression of how surprised you are about something that you find hard to believe. But you don't actually think that you know something, but nevertheless, you're not going to believe the thing that you actually know. So knowledge definitely seems to involve some kind of belief for us. And the second part of this, truth, right? We already dealt with that a little bit, because we certainly think that knowledge is true. Right? It's no problem for us to conceive of false opinions. Right? We may think many of our opinions may be false, right? Though we don't know which ones they are. Right? But it doesn't make much sense to us to think of knowledge as being somehow false. Okay, I have this body of knowledge, and it falls into true knowledge and false knowledge. Okay? There's true and false opinion, but we don't think of there being true and false knowledge. So for something to count as something that we actually know, something that we have knowledge of, right, then we're going to think that it's not only believed, but it's also true. Now, the third element, right, of that definition, justification, right, the idea that we have some sort of support or evidence for what we know. Okay? This is we a common sense sort of element in what we think of as knowledge and how it might differ from opinion. Okay? It's easy to understand that it's quite possible to believe something, and it might be very well possible that what you believe about something also happens to be true, okay? But you don't really have good reasons for that belief. Okay? So you'd think that person in that situation, right, who has a belief, that belief happens to be true, but that person has no evidence or justification for the belief, we wouldn't call that knowledge. And so we arrive at this common definition, right? Knowledge is justified true belief. Mm-hmm. Now, Plato actually considers that particular definition, not in the Republic in any of the passages that you're reading, but in a later dialogue of his, a dialogue called the Theaetetus. We are not reading the Theaetetus in this course, but I highly recommend it to you. It's a definition that he considers and rejects. Now, in the Republic, in these passages we have, Plato lays out more about what we have called the theory of forms. And we'll see that the theory of forms has definite implications. The theory of forms, as it's laid out in Phaedo, now in the Republic, has definite implications for what we think about the nature of knowledge and opinion and the relationship of the two. And indeed, he begins by contrasting knowledge and opinion in order to clarify this notion of the forms. Now, in the Republic, in his discussion with Glaucon, Socrates refers to knowledge and opinion as two types of powers or abilities. Each is a kind of dunamis, is the Greek word. a word that is at the root of our word dynamic. A power or an ability, a function, is, he says, that by which we are able to do things, and this applies not only to human beings, but applies to other animals as well. He illustrates this with the powers of sight and the powers of hearing. Seeing and hearing are two things by which we are able to actually do things. If we didn't have any of these sorts of powers, any of our senses, then we wouldn't be able to really do anything in the world, and it would make it very difficult for our survival. So he classes knowledge and opinion also as two sorts of powers, two distinct sorts of powers indeed. As distinct sorts of powers, and here the analogy to sensory perception continues, Socrates also suggests that knowledge and opinion have two distinct objects. Now, note right there that that is already going to suggest to us that the conception of knowledge that he's about to develop is one that would not be able to fit that typical common definition of knowledge as being justified true belief. If knowledge is justified true belief, then the object of belief or opinion and the object of knowledge can be one and the same thing. They don't have to be two different sorts of object. You might have an opinion about something, but lack the evidence to be able to say that you actually know it for sure, and later gather that evidence, and your opinion then becomes something that is not just a mere belief, but is something that is in fact known, that you now have knowledge of. But we see that Plato is already setting things up to look at it in a different way, right? With the suggestion that knowledge and opinion are two distinct powers, just like hearing and sight and taste, and each has a different sort of an object to it. So how do we distinguish those powers? Well, he goes on by wanting to distinguish them, okay, by what's affected by them. And so here, Plato now brings in this distinction between reality, between what is and what is not. So knowledge and opinion seem to be opposed in one way. Okay? The idea of reality and the negation of reality, or being and not being, if you will, is another opposition. But this is not this is not a parallel opposition. Socrates makes the observation that it doesn't make a lot of sense to suppose that not being would be the object of opinion. You can't really have opinions if your opinions are not about anything at all, opinion of nothing at all. So not being, the opposite of being, is not the object of an opinion. However, he says, if there is anything such that it falls somewhere in between being and becoming, then this indeed is exactly what we mean by the object of opinion. Now, the distinction between knowledge and opinion as two different faculties is now mapped on to this distinction between being and not being, or rather being and what might be in between being and not being. So here Plato brings back in, or rather Socrates, the character of Socrates, brings back in this distinction between beautiful things and the idea of beauty in and of itself. So there are many, many different beautiful things in the world, right, that we can encounter and that we appreciate. Okay? If we take all of the beautiful things that we find, we may find that, or that we're willing to call beautiful, we may find, if we're looking for something that they all have in common, we may find that there isn't one thing that we find that they all have in common other than our calling them all beautiful. There are many beautiful things in the world, okay? Rainbows and sunsets and flowers and beauties of nature and Helen of Troy and beautiful people, beautiful music and beautiful art and beautiful institutions, the beauty of a mathematical proof, and so on and so forth. We could keep on going with all kinds of things. Now, what Socrates claims about the many beautiful things that we find in the world that we identify as beautiful, maybe very well rightly so. What he claims about those things is that there isn't in fact any one of them that we could not at the same time in some respect also call the opposite of beautiful. Every beautiful thing might in some respect or other also be very much not beautiful. Although Plato doesn't say this in the Republic, we could continue with the opposite. We could take that the other way around too. We could say of the many, many things in the world that we would call ugly, we'll find that everything that's ugly in some respect might be beautiful as well. And so none of the things that we encounter is beautiful simply in and of itself. Okay? It's always beautiful in a certain way, in a certain respect, in relation to something else. Nothing is just simply beautiful, period. And so he distinguishes the idea of beauty as something in and of itself from the idea of these many, many things that are beautiful, but at the same time that also are not beautiful. And as we'll see in an argument that comes in a later passage here in the Republic, our ability to recognize beauty in the things that we call beautiful, that ability rests on the fact that there must be, in Plato's view, this form or idea of beauty itself, that which simply is beautiful in and of itself. It's by participation in this that beautiful things are beautiful, if you remember that line from the Phaedo. This notion now, so now we have the objects of knowledge, and so now we see that for Plato, the objects of knowledge are something very different from the objects of opinion. We can have opinion about the many beautiful things in the world. Our opinions may be true or may be false. We may have good reasons for the opinions we have. Others may have bad reasons for the opinions that they have. Okay? Having opinion doesn't mean the opinion might not be well-founded or ill-founded. Knowledge, on the other hand, is about something different entirely. Knowledge is focused on the forms, upon what the reality or essence of things is in and of itself, not upon the variable, dependent, conditioned, and transient shape of things in the world around us that we perceive. This will be illuminated and explained further in the next of Plato's metaphors here that we're going to look at. This is the analogy of the divided line, and we will look at that in our next encounter.